So today I'm going to talk to you about the relativity of customer experience, the science and strategy behind them. And I must apologize first, I'm completely out of business card, so if you want to connect with me, LinkedIn is the way to go, okay? So before I begin, just let me ask you a very simple question. Why is customer experience important? Why? Why do you think it's important? I mean, you heard it from last session that, don't prove it to the CFO, right? But we also need to prove that it has some business value, right? Somebody else have done this already, right? The simple answer is that it's good for business. So Watermark Consulting have already did this analysis for 8 years of stock performance, comparing leaders in customer experience versus the market average. Guess what? The leader does better, and the laggers does worse, okay? So given that context, let me ask you another question. What do you think makes experience good? You heard a lot of tactics and tips and programs on how to give customer experience, deliver a good customer experience. But what makes an experience a good experience? Think about this for a second. Okay? This answer is also very simple, right? You basically have to just deliver more than the customer expects, okay? So in some rough sense, it's not very scientific and accurate. Like, I'm a data scientist. I could be very, very anal about math. But in some rough sense, customer experience is really the difference of what you deliver and what the customer expects, right? So it's really just this, right? If your customer expectation is at this level and you deliver at that level, you will actually have a satisfied customer, right? If you deliver more, you will have delighted customer. If you deliver less, then you're going to have disappointed customer, right? So the problem is that it's not what you do today, right? I'm sure all of you have been delivering excellent services and products to your customers for a long time. The problem today is that the customer's expectation has risen, okay? So even though you've been delivering the same way you have been for the last 50, 100 years, right? You're going to end up with disappointed customers. That's the reality, right? And guess what? We actually commissioned Nielsen to do a study. They actually say that 82% of the CEOs says, from companies that are greater than $1 billion, right? They said that customer expectation has risen compared to the last 3 years, right? Okay, so basically, customer experience is relative to the consumer's expectation, okay? So it's relative. So today we are going to talk a little bit about relativity, okay? This shows the geeky side of me, the physics side of me, okay? So everything is relative, even time and space. So we are going to talk about time and space. This actually brings us to this framework that I'm going to show you. It's actually I would say, a small piece of my work, and there's actually many more that I do, but I'm going to show you this little framework. It's kind of cute. Okay, so basically, it has space, it has a spatial dimension, and it also has a temporal dimension, a time dimension, right? So let's focus on the time dimension first. The time dimension basically is just the customer's journey, right? It tells you when things happen. But the spatial dimension is when things get interesting, because space tells you where things happen. And those are basically the channels that you're familiar with, right? So there's the traditional channel, there's a digital channel, and now, of course, everybody is also focusing on the mobile channel as well, right? The traditional channel can be divided into, I would say, these are what we call physical channels, right? And then there's also, the physical channels basically are physical location, actual people that you meet, and print medium that you could touch and read, right? And there's also electronic medium as well. The electronic medium is basically like analog TV, radios, and as well as chat, right? So these are electronic channels. And then we get into the digital world, right? The digital world, you all are very familiar with all your search engine, your websites, right? And notice that it actually just replicating a lot of the stuff in the physical world in digital space, right? Basically, a website is basically a digital version of your physical location, right? And likewise, like this print medium is being converted to digital content. So it's replicating the physical world in the digital space, right? Now, what comes after this? What comes after this is really interesting because what comes after this is social, okay? So social basically consists of your typical social media, such as the community and social networks, right? And then we move into the mobile era. The mobile era basically is also replicating everything in the digital world again, right? So basically because today you could pretty much access all your social, the internet, right, Facebook and everything on your mobile device, right? So basically it's replicating, so instead of making this graph, this table much, much bigger, I'm just gonna say that all this mobile, digital, and social, they all kind of go into here, right? But what's new in mobile is that you have apps, right? And you also have these group-based chat, like WeChat, WhatsApp, Line, right? All these things are getting really popular today, okay? So that's basically the framework. So now when you actually cross the customer journey with these channels, cross product between space and time, what you created is all the touch points, right? So when you talk about, you create touch point, so now you can actually be very granular about the temporal dimension. For example, right, you may say that there's during the research phase, there's a phase where you become interested about a product, when you're comparing product, when you actually like it, and when you actually make the decision, right? Likewise, during this use phase, right, if you're selling software, maybe there is actually install phase, or run phase, and upgrade phase. During the support phase, right, you may actually try to contact the company multiple attempts, right? There may be a first attempt, second attempt, third attempt, right? So you could be very granular in the time dimension as well. And so likewise, you could be very granular in the spatial dimension as well too, right? You can actually say, okay, all the search engines, I'm gonna break them up into Google, Bing, and Yahoo. I'm gonna break up these community of interest into YouTube, Instagram, and blogs. And I'm gonna break up these social networks into Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, right? And guess what? New technology is being created every day, right? So this framework is actually extensible. You could, as new technology is being added, you basically create new medium for people to communicate and touch your brand, right? So maybe in the future, augmented reality becomes big, right? People can play Pokemon and actually engage with your brand digitally with augmented reality, right? So that could be a new channel, right? Okay, so that's the framework. That is the framework, okay? So in the interest of time, right, I'm just not gonna go into the granular detail, but just give it a high-level sense of how do you actually use this framework. So when you talk about customer experience, you really mean the entire set of grids, right? And there's actually a lot of grids here, a lot. I don't think there is a role in a company where one person is responsible for everything here, right? Typically, you have a division of labor, right? If you are a digital marketer, you may be really interested in the digital experience. If you have a store, right, you may be interested in the in-store experience. If you're a mobile strategist, you may be very interested in this part of the framework, right? And if you are interested in giving customers a good social customer experience, then you're interested in that part of the grid, right? And these experience can also be, in the pre-sale stage, right? The pre-sale stage, maybe if you are a product designer, you may be really interested in the out-of-the-box experience of your product, right? And you may be interested in the experience of how people actually are using your product, what the experience is like that, right? And maybe the support experience, right? So what does that tell you? That tells you that customer experience is really everybody's job, right? It's just not one person's job, right? No one can cover the entire grid. Everybody covers some part of the grid of this framework, right? Okay. So with that framework in mind, let's take a look at what is a typical customer journey look like. What would that be? We know that we have to move forward in time, right? We cannot roll back time. We can't violate laws of physics, right? So it looks something like this. But we don't hit all the channels when we move forward in time, right? So it's more like this, right? It kind of jumps around from different channel to different point, different place, right? So it's really hard to follow that dot around, so I'm going to annotate this a little bit for you, right? For example, this customer saw a TV ad, right, about your product, and then he Googled for it, and then found some community interest and read about it, and then he actually go to the store and check it out, right? He actually buy the product on your website, right? And when he actually want to use it, basically there's only one place to use it, is the physical world, right? We're not in the matrix yet today, right? So maybe someday we will in the matrix. So not yet, okay? But when he actually needs help on how to use a product, he again go Google for it. He found some community to help them solve the question, to solve his problem, but then he did not resolve that successfully. He actually called the agent for help, right? And finally, he may actually share his experience on his social network or group-based chat, and so on and so forth. So that's a stereotypic kind of one customer's journey would look like. You just bounce around, right, on different channels, all right? So next, we have to kind of take a look at, what do people compare and what do people expect, right? Remember, I talked about the customer experience is relative to customers' expectation. So how do expectations arise? But to understand that, we have to understand what do people actually compare, right? So let me ask you guys, should we compare an apple and orange? Yes, no? Nobody says anything? Should you compare apple and oranges? Yes? No? Yes? Okay, let me rephrase the question. You guys are very shy, okay? Can you compare an apple and orange? Yes? Yeah, you can, right? Okay, but should you? Maybe not, right? But you can. But how about an apple and a fish? Yes? Can you compare apple and fish? You can, right, in some way, but most people probably wouldn't, right? How about an apple and a cat? You got the idea, right? The more dissimilar things are, the less likely you are to compare them. The more similar things are, the more you will actually want to compare them. But the interesting thing is that when the variance and diversity is equal to 1, is the attribute that makes them similar has a variance of 1, that's when you actually expect them to be the same. Okay? People expect them the same. What does that actually mean? What that means is that suppose you only know one kind of apple in the world. You only know one kind of apple, right? Then you would expect them to be exactly the same, right? If you know there's two kinds of apple, there's Washington apple, there's Fuji apple, then you would not expect them to be the same because you have two names for it, right? You would still compare them because they're very similar, but you would not expect them to be the same. Get that? Okay, now, what is the business implication of that? The business implication is that while experience from the same company, the same brand, people expect them to be the same, right? How many DBS is there? It's only one, right? How many Sony is there? It's only one, right? Same brand, why should the experience be any different, right? Also, experience through the same technology, people expect them to be the same as well, okay? So if you are used to Twitter, right, used to calling a cab on Uber, right, you would expect any company who use Twitter to respond to you to respond just like how your friends would respond to you, right? Because it's the same platform. It's the same Twitter. There's no two Twitter, right? So people expect those experiences the same. So with that, we can understand how bad experience arise. Why do you think people have bad experience? Why? Inconsistency, right? Exactly. All right, now, let's take a look at what we call this inconsistency is what we call experiential gap. It's experiential gap. One of the classic experiential gap is what we call the pre-sale and post-sales gap. Before you buy, I'm going to be super nice to you. I'll do everything you ask me to do. But after you buy, what happened? Don't talk to me, right? It costs me money when you talk to me, right? So this is experiential gap. When people go from one touch point to another touch point, the experience is inconsistent, right? Okay, there's actually many more of this, right? For example, right? You may find a website to reserve a taxi, really nice and clean, right? But what comes to pick you up is this, right? Not what you expected, right? Okay, there's more, right? You may have a really well-organized website, but it's totally not responsive on social network. You may have a really amazing TV ad that wow people, but then the reviews on communities are poor, right? You may have even a really lively, vibrant community, and then is completely not on your mobile, right? So these are what we call experiential gap. When you move from one touch point to another touch point, the experience is inconsistent, right? This is what we call experiential gap. All right, so now you know why bad experience arise. If you have a bad experience, how do you fix it? How do you actually fix it? Where should you focus? Right? Like I said, this grid is so big that no one is responsible for everything, right? So where should you focus your effort and resources? Well, that depends on what you want to do, right? So you may actually, so let's take a look at the spatial temporal kind of properties of this framework, okay? So these physical channels, they are spatially localized, and the way that people interact with them is synchronous, right? That means you have to be at a certain place and at a certain time, right? It's just like catching Pokemons, right? You have to be at this right place at the right time in order to catch it, right? So Pokemon is also mixed kind of reality. That's why it's called, right? So it's mixing the physical and digital in some way, right? So, and then when it gets to print medium, they start to be spatially dispersed because you can mail stuff to people, right? And you can actually, but mostly consume synchronously as well, right? Print medium, you consume asynchronously, right? So that's mostly synchronous, not all synchronous. Now, when you get to digital, something really interesting happened. Because now, the interaction with these channels is completely asynchronous. Right? You can interact them synchronously, but you could also completely asynchronous, right? So now what happened when you actually go to, so it's also spatially dispersed, of course, but mobile is asynchronous consumption, but it's so spatially dispersed that it's ubiquitous, okay? Our phone is pretty much with us all the time, okay? I bet if we make a phone that's waterproof, we take it to shower with us, okay? So basically, what does it say? I mean, if your goal is to have the widest reach, right? Those are the channels that you need to focus on, right? But let's look at some other properties of these channels, right? Let's take a look at the pure interaction properties of these channels, right? So on these physical channels, basically, the interaction is actually pretty transient. They're hard to track, okay? The physical channel, right? Now, and also, even if you can track them, it's actually not accessible to the public. It's opaque. It's what we call opaque, okay? It's not accessible to everyone, right? So now when you actually gets to, starting with print medium, okay, all this electronic and digital medium, things become trackable. You can track them, but still they're not public, right? The data are not actually accessible to everyone, right? So they're still opaque. When it gets to social, right, social actually includes, the mobile social as well, right? So now, it's definitely trackable and persistent, right? It stays forever, right? But now the interesting thing is that like they become transparent. They become public. Once you tweet something, it stays on Twitter pretty much forever until you decide to delete it, right? All right. Now, this is really interesting. But when you actually get to mobile, we have almost suddenly a dip right here, okay? So it's persistent for sure, but now it's selectively transparent, and some of it's actually opaque. Okay, with these, like, for example, Line and WeChat and WhatsApp, okay? Why do you think that is, okay? So it's really interesting because what that means is that social is almost an inflection point, right? It has almost like the strongest peer-to-peer interaction, right? So basically, you probably heard that, some people actually think that, if you give people a good experience, a good customer experience, you end up with loyal customers. You do, but what does loyal customer means? Well, loyal customer means actually people are revisiting this journey over and over again, right? You may not actually revisit this journey all the way from the beginning, but you probably go in when you start buying, right? Because you're already aware of the product, you already know the product, you may actually do a little bit of research about a new product, but that's about it, right? You revisit this journey again. So you probably also heard that customer service is the new marketing. Why? Can you see why? Because the next time they buy depends on kind of how the experience is when you support them. If you don't support your customer well, good luck when they actually for them to come back and buy next time. They're not going to do it, right? You have to serve them well to earn the right to market to them again, right? Okay, so with that in mind, what does that actually tell you? If you actually trying to drive the strongest influence on then basically the social channels are the ones that you have to focus on, right? Okay, so these are kind of strategy, right? If you want to, what do you want to do, right? But there's also a data-driven approach to this problem. I'm a data scientist, so I crunch numbers all the time. So customer experience is ultimately a data discipline, a big data discipline, right? Think about all the data you can collect from all these different channels. It's a big data discipline, right? So I have shown you the stereotypic customer journey for one customer. It looks like this before, right? Now, what happens if you map out another customer's journey? What would they look like? Yeah, it would be different, right? Would it look exactly the same? Probably not, right? It will look something like this. What happens if you mapped it again for another person? It will look something like that. If you do that for many, many customers, you will start to see some patterns start to emerge. What are you seeing? What are you seeing here? You're not seeing anything? Yeah, there's some touch point that's heavily visited, right? So those are essentially the touch point that you have to focus on to improve your customer experience, because those are the ones that give you the biggest bang on the buck, right? So now let's think about how do we actually quantify the customer experience at each one of these touch points, right? Even though there's only like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 grids here, that's still a lot, right? People are having trouble only focusing on one channel, but let alone 8 channels, right? 8 touch points, right? So let's focus on that. Now, if you actually are able to quantify people's customer experience on these grids, these subset of grids of the entire framework, which is only a small part, like as I said before, right? You may get something like this. Right? You're gonna see that, okay, I could improve my product usage experience a little bit, right? I'm doing pretty good on my search engine and website. I am doing well in my community of interest on this group-based chat, but what I really need help is with my customer community, right? So that's where you need to focus on, right? All right, so I kind of hand wave over and say, suppose you have data on this. How do you actually get these data on these channels? How do you actually do that? Well, you have to kind of start with a survey, right? You don't have to end with a survey, but you do have to ask your customer and to understand what their experience is like, right? So it's a really simple 3-step survey. I am going to go pretty fast. So first is the awareness question. I learned about this product through this channel, right? So this is, you just check one that you care about, right? The second one is I actually prefer to use the following channel to do research, buy, or get support, right? And then you can check all that applies, right? And then you have to ask them which one they actually use, because maybe the one they actually prefer to use, you don't actually offer, right? So you have to look at the difference between these two answers to figure out what do customers actually prefer and what are you not offering, right? And then, so finally, on this channel that you actually use, right, you have to ask them the experiential question. Are you delighted? Are you satisfied? Are you disappointed, right? On all the ones that you check here, right? So that's the survey. So with that, hopefully you could figure out the customer experience for some customer, not all customer, very, very small subset of your customer, right? So we all know that response rate from survey is low, right? What's your response rate like? 23%, that's actually very high, okay? Typically, people are seeing like mid-single digits, right? With mobile, you can actually get up to tens or maybe like 15, 20%, like mobile. Right? It's interesting. So you get 23. I'm going to ask you how to actually do that. All right. So how do you get more data? Right? Even if you get like 10%, that's still like 90% of the customer experience you don't know. Right? How do you get more data? This is where big data and data science and machine learning comes to help. Okay? So here's where you have to kind of ask yourself, right? What kind of customer interaction data do you have and have lots of? Lots of those data, right? And this is really a big data problem, like I said before, right? And one thing I want you to keep in mind is that you may actually have a lot of data about your customer, but those are not the data that you need, okay? Whether you're male or female or your age group or your demographic, it's not going to tell you their experience with you, okay? So keep in mind, these are data about the interaction with you, not the data about your customer. It's called customer interaction, the key being the interaction there. It's customer's interaction with you. Right? So there's many of these data, right? For example, product usage data. That's how your customer interact with your product, right? How your marketing engagement data. That's how your customer engage with your marketing campaign, right? Your support center operation data, right? So these are basically how your customer interact with your customer support team, right? Likewise, social media. Right? Basically, all these are behavioral data of some sort, right? Okay, so now we all know that getting data is hard. So how do you actually turn these data into customer experience data? How do you do that? Okay, all of you kind of start looking a little blank here. All right, so let's focus on one example that focuses on, say, the customer support center. Okay, whether you have customer experience through the support center data. Okay, so suppose this is your entire customer base. Say you have 10 million customers, right? And these are the customers who have come to you for service or for help, so support at some point in time, right? So at any given time, the fraction of customers who come to you for help may be very low. But if you look at all time, it can actually be pretty significant, right? In some industry, it may even consist of 50% of your customer base. Okay? So these are the customer that you have support center operator and data of, right? Because they come to you, right? They came to you, so you know how they interact with you. For example, what's the wait time, what's the handle time, what's the calls per, number of calls per issue, number of agent per issue, number of issue per year, so on. You have lots and lots of data on these customers who came to you, right? All right. Now, let's say we have about 50% if you look at all time, right? So this is a customer who came to you at least once throughout their entire customer lifetime, right? So you should have some data about this customer. So that's, say, 5 million, right? So with that, we can actually pretty understand fairly well what the customer experience is like. But like I said before, the survey response data is typically much, much lower, right? It's about, say, single digit. Let's give it the worst case scenario, say like 1%, right? So these dark blue ones are the ones who actually respond to your survey and tell you like whether they are delighted, disappointed, or just satisfied, okay? So basically, you're probably wondering, I have a lot of data on these customers, right? How do I turn these data into the customer experience data? How do I do that? Right? What you need is a model, right? You need a model that takes these data and kind of convert them, turn them into this customer experience data. So how do you come up with that model? How do you come up with that model, right? Now, there's actually many ways, many approaches to come up with that model, right? So one is you could use a rule-based approach. You could simply say, come up with rules, okay? So call waiting time more than 10 minutes is bad experience. Less than 5 minutes is good. But you also have data on whether the issue is actually resolved or not, right? So you have to kind of augment that a little bit. You say, well, you know, if the issue is not resolved, maybe 5 minutes is not good enough, right? Maybe like, you know, if it's actually resolved, 10 minutes may be okay, right? So, but that also depends on what kind of customer you have. If I'm a premium customer, my tolerance for wait time is much lower, right? They need to be maybe less than 3 minutes, right? So you can see that, you know, as the number of data points increase, right, the rules become very, very complex. It actually gets exponentially more complex, okay? So now, how do you actually are able to do this, right? If you have so much data on them and you can't actually come up with these rules by yourself. This is where machine learning comes in, right? In machine learning, you do not have to come up with the rules yourself, right? What you do is that you show them examples, right? These are called training data, right? To train your model, right? And guess what? We have some data that we could use to train the model, right? We have this survey data. We could use the survey data to train our model, right? Because those are the people, you know, these are the people who told you they had good experience, and this is what their customer support center operation data look like, okay? And these are the people who told you that they have bad experience, and that's what we have their customer support center data as well, right? Because for these group who respond, we have both their customer support center data as well as their customer experience data, right? Okay, so if you actually show the machine learning algorithm, the learning algorithm, all of these examples, it's going to come up with a rule that is actually consistent with the data that you showed it, right? Okay, that's how it works. So if you don't know how to do that, don't worry. Hire a data scientist, right? They will do that for you, okay? Now, so basically, this is the process of coming up with that model. Now, once you have the model, don't forget, you have lots of data on these customers. Lots of data. You have so what you do is that you basically now, don't forget that you have data on 5 million customers, right? Just feed those data into your model, right? And what you get, comes out of that model is a predicted customer experience, right? You will have customer experience data for 5 million customers. Okay? Easy, right? Okay. Now, so what should you do next? What should you do next, right? So like I said before, this grid, this framework that I show you is almost too big, right? No one is responsible for the entire framework, the set of all the grid, all the touch points, right? So identify which part of the grid are you responsible for. Next is that you have to identify which one of those grids that you're responsible for, you actually have access to data. You can actually get data from those touch points, right? After you do that, you need to survey and collect some data. It will be a small set of data, people they have to survey. And after that, you give the data to your data scientists and then let them crunch a number and come up with a model. And once you come up with a model, you'll be able to feed in all the data that you have about the customer and then know what their experience might have been, okay? So, but that's not the end, right? Because now you have to share and disseminate. You have to disseminate this data, right? Disseminate this data. So remember, you started out identifying which part of the framework you're responsible for. Right now, you have the experience of these customers for those parts that you're responsible for, right? So it's a great way to get other people to fill in their part of the grid, right? Okay, if you are a VP of support, you could say that, like, my customer experiences for my support social channels are these, right? Marketers, are you over-promising? Why don't you test, why don't you actually measure your part of the grid, right? This is how you slowly fill out the entire grid so you have a better picture of what the customer experience is like, okay? And with that, I'm just going to leave you with that, this couple of data points, right? So 79% of the CEOs from these 300 company of revenue more than $1 billion basically says that the products are being commoditized. Product and services are being commoditized today, right? The battleground in the future is basically customer experience. Now you have the framework and the measurement framework behind it, so go and win the battle. Thank you very much. Okay? So if you want to dig deeper, there's two ways to do it. One is you could read the couple of books that I've written, so you also learn a little bit about other stuff that I do. And you can also come to talk to my colleagues and booth C6, which is on the far end of that wall. Okay? Thank you very much.